go ahead and remove our feeder axle. And we will go ahead and take out our ratchet spring and ratchet spring guide. So this is your spring guide. And then you'll have an updated spring. The updated spring, and this one should be like a brass color instead of the red spring. And that's also going to come with the A1 update. So we'll set those two off to the side. Most of the time what we run into is a damaged feeder ratchet. That's one of the main causes of the Cyclone feed not wanting to operate correctly, is the tooth on that ratchet actually folds over and breaks. So when that folds over and breaks, it'll skip around the axle and not catch the teeth in the axle. So I can show you how to replace that. It's real simple to do. All you're going to want to do is remove the pin that holds it to the plunger. This piece is called your plunger. And then from there you have the other pin on the opposite side. This is your short pin. To remove those pins, simply get a small tool. I have a screwdriver that's filed down on the end. And you can pop those pins out. Some of the pins will fit really tight, and that's perfectly fine. These pins seem to come out fairly easy for the most part. Kind of see this one's taking a little bit more. Then from there you remove your ratchet. You can finish pulling your pin out. I'm just going to leave it in there for now. And you would get the new ratchet and reinstall it pretty much the same way you took it back off. Before doing that, I want to touch base on the cylinder itself. You have this cylinder plug, that's what we call it. There's a little groove inside there. You want to make sure that that groove is on top of the spring. You don't want it flipped around, because then it will put too much spring pressure onto the spring and the cylinder, and that will cause it to misfeed as well. So always make sure that it's facing the correct direction. I usually don't take it off whenever I replace a feeder ratchet. I'll just leave it on there, not even mess with it at all. So now you get the replacement feeder ratchet. On some of the older models, they were a tan color or maybe even a clear white color. All the new up-to-date ratchets should be black in color. So we'll go ahead, we'll reinstall the ratchet, and you want to make sure that the hole with the plunger lines up with the hole and the pin in the ratchet. And from there you should just be able to push it down, and it'll slide back into place. And then just kind of check to make sure it's moving freely. Should always move freely for the most part. Then from there I usually take the spring and the spring guide, slide that back into place. I usually do it through the back end of the ratchet. That's usually the easiest way of doing it. We'll go ahead, we'll put our short pin back in. And there is a difference between these two pins. You have a longer pin in the front of the ratchet and a shorter pin in the back of the ratchet. So you don't want, I mean, you can't get these mixed around at all. You just want to make sure that you have those in the right position. From there, we usually have people they'll have a difficult time with trying to put this axle back in. It's pretty easy to do. You just start it off by slipping the end in first. And then what you're going to do is you're going to kind of tip it and then push it. And then it'll snap right back into place. So you're just tipping the front end and then pushing it down into the spot. Then from there, I'll usually re-lubricate the U-cup seal O-ring. We'll reinsert that back into the cylinder. Now when you reinsert your plunger, your spring, and your cylinder plug back into the cylinder, you want to compress these parts into the cylinder. From there, you're going to drop it into the feeder housing while still trying to maintain the compression of that spring and cylinder. We have a lot of people that they'll put it all back together and they'll have the spring flopped out like that. That's not the way it goes back together. You always want to make sure that you have that compressed into the cylinder and then you're pushing it down into the feeder housing. So once you have that back down into the feeder housing, you can let go of that spring and it should sit right in place. Then from there you're going to put your feeder ratchet spring back in. Then your feeder housing nut. And then usually from there I like to re-lubricate it a little bit. Just put a drop of oil here, drop of oil there. And then I usually will re-lubricate the nub on the underside of the bottom plate. We'll go ahead and put the bottom plate back on. From there we have our screws sitting off to the side here. Like I said before, you want to make sure that when you put these screws back into place that you're not over tightening these screws. They just need to be snug. I'm going to be really careful being that I'm using a drill, and before I tighten these down, like I said, you just want to make sure that they're just snug. Okay, and that about does it. Like I said, that bottom plate's not on there really tight at all. From there, you're going to want to reinstall your paddles. There's a difference between the two paddles. One is obviously a lot shorter than the other. The short one always goes in first. So we'll go ahead, we'll slide that paddle in, and then we'll slide your larger paddle in last. And just push those down. From there, we'll go ahead and reinsert our screw. Same thing with this screw, you want to make sure that it's not too tight. It will force the axle up against the bottom side of the feeder housing and it will cause your cyclone feed to malfunction. We'll go ahead, we'll put back together our banjo fitting. Like I said before, you always want to make sure the O-ring is on the back side of the fitting. You want to make sure that that fitting is snug. Never over tighten the fitting. You have a very good chance of snapping the fitting if you over tighten it. And that concludes the video for the X7 cyclone feed disassembly and troubleshooting.